One of the most ironic things about the Evergreen situation is that the way it's set up is it's almost built specifically for independent thinkers, independent workers, people that are self-motivated. And that's why it's such a tragedy that it's fallen into this incredibly strong groupthink, at least from the admin and certain large contingents of the faculty. And I think it's really unfortunate because the way that George Bridges wants to direct it is towards underserviced communities, and just towards the bottom of the barrel. And he almost said this explicitly, that he wants we're here to serve the bottom of the barrel.
And given our high rates of admission, counselors in high schools and community colleges won't refer students to Evergreen. They question whether students attending our college are sufficiently talented to contribute to an intellectually stimulating and energizing academic environment. I've actually heard that in eavesdropping on admission counselors, their discussions of the criteria they use. And I can tell you last fall when I sat amidst them, 2 counselors were saying, I would never recommend a student go to a school with a high admission rate. Students there aren't very smart. Well, that's not true. But that's how it felt. And I didn't like how I felt hearing that because I knew Evergreen would be on their list. And note the close relationship between the red line and the blue line, those who apply and those we admit. This is a long-standing trend that's a reflection of our commitment to social justice. We seek to serve students that other schools won't. It's a priority for the college and has been for a long time, and I assume will continue that way.
Evergreen's education model is not for the bottom of the barrel. In a certain respect, the programs themselves, 16 credit programs, are the programs that last the whole year. That's so much freedom, so much intensity too. And it really stretches you with some of these really large programs that if you don't already have the academic chops, then you're going to be flailing. Either that or the education itself, the classes themselves have to dumb themselves way down to the lowest common denominator. I guess in a certain way there is no such thing as a highest common denominator because everybody that's operating at the peak of their game is operating completely on a different level from everybody else, in a way.
That's a lot to unpack there, so you might have to repeat some of it, but I'll start with the first point, which I believe was Evergreen's really a place for people who sort of have a direction already. It's more of a you get out what you put in. So if you really don't have a direction, you can end up going 4 years without coming out with a degree that's meaningful in any way. In a general sense, I agree with that whole dumbing it down to the lowest common denominator. However, in my experience, I'd say the majority of my courses, I have been fortunate enough to have professors that really push students to strive to be their best, to the best of their ability. I would say it's, this is true of anywhere, not just Evergreen. There's going to be students in classes that just don't want to be there or aren't motivated and will just do the bare minimum or not even do the bare minimum. So in that sense, I think that the professors do their best to lift up as many students as they can, as opposed to lowering their standards to fit the, I guess you could say, like capabilities of the students who are struggling. And I wanted to go back to something you said earlier about the administration, the whole underserved, trying to serve the underserved communities. I would agree with that notion. That's what I've seen since coming to Evergreen back in 2015. That isn't to say that helping people or communities that are struggling is a bad thing. Where I kind of see a problem at Evergreen is when that support of those communities or those individuals turns into something that raises them beyond and above everyone else in terms of their level of power and resources that are given to them. It seems sort of like a kind of a twisted or reversed reparations model of there's like a sense of guilt. I I perceive a sense of guilt in the administration, well, specifically from George Bridges.
And students, on behalf of the college, I apologize to each of you for the ways in which you've experienced the effects of these equity gaps. This has happened, it continues to happen, and it must stop. He's a great advocate for Evergreen at the Capitol, and a student whose passion for the underserved is immensely inspiring.
Specifically from George Bridges of, I'm white, I can't understand what experiences the POC community goes through, so I have to compensate for that by providing these services and uplifting this community to where their voices
Or centered.
Yes, centered. Yeah, that's another catchphrase at Evergreen, is centering on the struggles of underrepresented communities.
How can we teach and learn in ways that build our capacity for better supporting and serving all of our students, and especially our students and colleagues of color?
And that's not necessarily a bad thing to do, so long as it doesn't bring down other groups.
How white people can work alongside people of color in a way that centers, in this case, Black voices, so the folks that are most affected. I would like to say that it's really simple. It's just about shutting up sometimes. And I think, it's really easy.
And I think this is kind of where I'm going to segue into the whole culture of intersectionality on the campus. The idea that history and the identities of people within the campus, and this isn't just Evergreen, but I'm going to stick to just talking about Evergreen, but that the identities are more meaningful than the individual character of students. For example, a student of color on the Evergreen campus, through the lens of kind of the generally accepted philosophy, would be that a person of color has historical oppression and therefore needs to be uplifted and given a stage to speak and voice their opinion. And it goes beyond that to where you need to respect that opinion and not disagree with it.
We have all the evidence we need that racism exists from the lived experiences of people next to us in this room today, the students we teach and advise, and the climate on this campus and our community and beyond. We don't need anything else to believe it. We just need to believe it.
And we also understand that people are all speaking from their own truth. So when you hear from students, when you hear from your peers, what they're saying about their experience is true for them, and that should never be discounted.
There cannot be progress without students of color's feelings and emotions to be considered valid and important rather than denied.
This is about playing the believing game. Name what's important and valuable about these goals. And for the places where you're like, I don't understand, or you have a knee-jerk reaction to question, ask the question, what would help you to understand how we landed on these goals?
And that's where I really have a problem with the whole philosophy, is that it doesn't leave room for actual debate about ideas.
Racism must be continually identified, analyzed, and challenged. No one is ever done. The question is not, did racism take place, but rather, how did racism manifest in that situation? The racial status quo is comfortable for most whites. Therefore, anything that maintains white comfort is suspect. Resistance is a predictable reaction to anti-racist education and must be explicitly and strategically addressed.
And that's dangerous for any group. It's not that it's about race, it's that it's about giving certain people the, I guess you could say, privilege to espouse ideas without having to defend them and just expect that everyone will agree with them, and those who don't is immediately identified as alt-right.
A student told me that you're a white supremacist.
I don't believe I am. I'm
You
a
don't
white
believe
person.
you are, but you accept that you might be.
No. Well, it depends on what you mean by a white supremacist. What does that mean? I'm a white person in a position of privilege.
Okay.
And I would just kind of like to bring this whole picture together. so as not to paint Evergreen as a horrible place, because it's not. It's a wonderful place, and it's full of a lot of wonderful people. However, it does have its problems. The administration supports the ideology of the far left. I'm going to call it the far left because that's what it is. There's a small segment of the student population at the school that espouses Marxism and a culture of reparations and identity politics.
So I hold a lot of different kinds of privilege. The two that are probably the most operative in my teaching are the fact that I'm white and I'm cisgender.
I am cisgender, black female, and straight.
I am a cisgender, straight woman. I am an immigrant, and getting a green card for me is something that has given me a lot of privilege.
I am a cisgendered woman who is white and queer and a first person in my family to go to college, and I grew up working class, and I am not disabled, and I'm fat. And those are all identities that are important to me.
I have a skin color that's different than sort of a lot of people who have power, but I'm a male, I'm straight, I'm cis, highly educated. My particular education is in math and physics, which gives me a lot of sort of space to be kind of the, oh, well, the scientist doesn't have to worry about social justice, right? Science is about the truth.
The list of identities for which you might have privilege, I can check off all of them, aside from being a woman.
When I walk into the room, I don't know whether it's male privilege, white privilege, overeducated privilege, it's down the whole list, ableism, age.
I can be helpful for white, cisgender, heteronormative men who are trying to figure out what to do, holding lots of cards of privilege about how to move forward in a meaningful, respectful way with respect to social justice.
I don't know if I said my pronouns, and I don't remember, and that's my cisgendered privilege showing, so I use she and her pronouns.
Founded on oppressor, oppressed.
Yes, founded on the victim and the oppressor philosophy.
Issues of race are built in systems of oppression that have been alive since way before we were, right? And so they're built into the system. It's going to take a long time for all of us to unravel them.
So the administration supports that, or at least inherently doesn't oppose it. I kind of equate that to the center command and control tower in a panopticon. So a panopticon prison system where there is a center surveillance within a prison system with the surrounding population being observed. The surrounding population is the student body. And within that student body, there are those who we can just call allies, right? Allies to the cause.
Best thing you can do as an ally is always listen and take instruction from those being oppressed.
This isn't to say that everyone who is an ally is aware of the danger of the philosophy.
I need 3 to 4 white people to go down to the VP meeting thing right now and go get anybody you know is on the elite faculty team and drag them ass over here into that office of George so they can make decisions right now. Is that clear?
Come on. If you got a sign, go to the front and project that shit. Go. And if you got a sign, you better not be quiet. And if you're white, you better not be quiet. Because y'all ain't lose shit. What did you lose? Nothing. Project that damn voice. Lose your voice.
Hey! Ho, ho! These racist teachers have got to go!
They just want to, or have a desire to contribute to a cause and feel good about contributing to a cause. So the allyship is very appealing.
We have all the evidence we need that racism exists from the lived experiences of people next to us in this room today, the students we teach and advise, and the climate on this campus, in our community, and beyond. We don't need anything else to believe it. We just need to believe it.
Hey, do you support black students and people of color?
Definitely.
You should get over there. And you have class. This is more important than that.
Yeah.
Combined with the far left student population, which is definitely not more than 10%. Definitely not, and I'd imagine far less.
Everyone, do not have cocktail parties on indigenous land. Do not pretend everything is fine. We have a fascist president-elect. We have unsafe students. We have white supremacists and neo-Nazis on campus. We have buzzwords and we have no commitments. What is everyone in this room doing with you if you're not committed to anti-oppression, to anti-racism?
Who here cares about our safety?
And then combine that with the allies, you're looking at maybe, this is just my impression, but maybe a third, so 30% or so of the student body fall within this category. And then the rest of the student body is either indifferent or slightly sympathetic to one side or the other, but don't really consider themselves falling into the category of an ally, or the very opposite end of a strongly opposed to this philosophy. And beyond that, there's just a lot of students, myself included, that just want to go to Evergreen to learn and not really get involved in identity politics and this whole philosophy on campus. So just trying to ignore it and go about our day. So this majority of the student population is really not active in this philosophy. However, you're looking at a situation where this majority ends up being effectively silenced, because with about a third of the population either being allies or on the far left of the spectrum, at any given moment, you have a 1 in 3 chance of being around someone who, if you speak against the common narrative, that
they come down hard on you.
Yes. So it's a silencing of the campus by having just enough of the student body adhere to that philosophy to where people don't feel comfortable in any given situation to outwardly express their opinion, especially when it deviates from the far left narrative.
You said that you had a discussion with Bridges. What was your impression of his view on the campus and what happened there and what's happening now?
My impression of his view on what was going on was that he was not happy about the way things were gone about. He didn't agree with how the students protested and acted and took things beyond an acceptable manner. However, that's not really the impression that you get when you see these videos of him online. He doesn't openly admit that he's opposed to it.
He falls in line.
What are you doing to protect people who you don't even want here in the first place? That's what college is for. You know that's what college is for. Higher education was not for black and brown people. What are you gonna do? Right now, I don't care about a plan. I'm talking about action. Because if it was your kids, you would be doing hell and high water for them.
I will commit to dealing with my own shit. My own racism.
Okay.
They're going to say some things that we don't like, and our job is to bring them around, or get them out. Right. And what I hear us stating that we are working toward is bring them in, train them, and if they don't get it, sanction.
He falls in line.
Mm-hmm. And I think therein lies the problem, and that was one of the points that I brought up, is that he needs to stand firm and not give in to demands of, frankly, protesters who were acting like children. That's the easiest way to describe it. Infantile response of screaming and throwing a tantrum to get their way.
But he doesn't make enough money to feed us, but you had enough time to take the money from all of us.
He doesn't even know
how to cut. Right, and that's what I'm saying. This is an issue if you're not going to fire him, and we have this on camera, so that's what I'm saying. Whatever you guys think is like imaginary and made up, we can take to a lawyer and lawsuit, and that's directly him speaking and saying, I cannot do X, Y, and Z, which is an explicit, against the Washington State's law.
Fuck you, George. See you right out.
Hey, fuck Brett too. He's not to get fired.
Fuck you, Brett. Get out of my face.
And all you other students here perpetuating white supremacy and racism, you guys get your ass out of here too. This is college.
I mean, they did have a direction that they were going for, and they ended up getting there. That direction was to gain further resources for the cause of the reversal of fortunes, to put themselves ahead of everyone else. What really frustrates me about George Bridges and the administration is that behind closed doors, there's an entirely different story than in the public view, right? So during my meeting with George Bridges, there's a very much a support and agreement with my concern that these protests were affecting the image of the college, the reputation of not only the student body, but the administration and George Bridges himself, and it's detrimental to the opportunities of all the students. Someone who's graduating from Evergreen, having all this negative media attention out there about the school, then has to deal with fighting against that negative stigma to any potential employer who looks at their transcript and sees Evergreen. Chances are that they may assign a negative opinion to that potential employee, just based on the fact that that person went to Evergreen. And I think that was one of my biggest concerns.
And he agreed.
He agreed.
Yeah, so even if he's showing concern to you behind closed doors, I haven't seen him do anything whatsoever to change the reputation of the college. Like, he's constantly doubling down on social justice.
As we look at these data, as we look at the initiatives we are planning, we remain committed, true to our stand on equity, on inclusion, and on social justice. Those are critical to our future and to the sense of belonging students have here. And as we focus on inclusion as a priority for the college, we must keep that in mind in everything we do. What I hear us stating that we are working toward is bring them in, train them, and if they don't get it, sanction.
So I haven't really seen him actually do anything to fix the college's reputation.
No, he hasn't. His actions showed something different when people who were recorded to have done, I would argue, illegal things and be the active part of the protest were not punished and were in fact put in charge of revising the student code of conduct.
Part of the aspects of like the student code of conduct, we've all kind of trying to be redefining and expanding on some of the definitions and some of the things that are unclear within the student code of conduct. And personally for me, I've been looking at restorative justice practices to like try to implement with informal resolutions, because throughout the student code of conduct, restorative justice is mentioned, but it's not like specifically, there's no like pathways that they show you or in like different like examples of like what an informal resolution looks like. And so that's really for me, I'm trying to implement things to make, rather than punitive measures like punishing people for certain things, making it so that there are learning opportunities and ways to like give back to the community and make sure we're being community structured and community oriented in terms of restorative justice.
So, I'm sorry. Could you just define restorative justice real quick? I think you kind of did, but I just want to be clear.
Yeah, so actually, let me pull up a couple of definitions I've been looking at, because I can give you my personal one, but I'd feel way.
But it's something other than punitive.
Oh yeah, so these aren't like punitive messages. Like restorative justice is like making it so that you're focusing on the harmed parties and making it so that you're making space for healing and making it so that there are ways to amend for the things that have happened to them.
Let's do some community building. Let's get together. Let's hang out. Let's talk. And yeah, we'll plot for the next one. And you in the white shirt, you're gonna be held accountable. You stand up in the white shirt right there. You don't get to just act out in front of people like that. That's fucked up. You don't just get to. I don't even know the words right now. Y'all know what he did. Y'all seen the video. Look at him, see his face. You're gonna be held accountable to the community. Whether the institution does it or we have to do it. There's the call out. Thank you.
Evergreen and most institutions are built on a racist model, and Evergreen claims to not be part of that process and has done very damaging things to its students of color, particularly its black students. And so we are here demonstrating taking student control over an institution that we're paying to be at to make sure that our needs are being met.
I'm here because I feel a lot of pressure to represent people who are often targeted by institutions, and I often don't feel like I have a choice but to be in these kind of spaces. And I'm also here to really center the idea that, like, as flawed as the institution has been, the flaws are always going to exist, and the only way to like actively be combating those is to really recenter the people that this was all built for, which are the students. And the only way to be doing that is to like really build in structures to like help hear student voices. And so I'm really passionate about the success of this project because it's one way to like actively be paying the people who have to do so much compromising and be so vulnerable for the work that they inherently have to do.
So the priority is that they stay in that room. If they aren't in that room, then we did something wrong. So you'll need to watch that door, watch all the doors, watch the windows. You need to keep eyes on them. And somebody needs to go in that room real quick to make sure that there's no way in that room for them to leave. That's the number one priority until we get our demands here.
I'd say the best way to describe it is sweeping it under the rug. There's kind of a unspoken mindset of, we just gotta ride this wave out. You know, the controversy will die down. This was kind of a blip on the radar, and there's no need to worry, the school's fine, and just kind of ignoring the issue and not really addressing the root causes of what led to the events of 2017. And that's a very troubling thing for me, is that nothing was addressed in the wake of 2017. The root causes of what led to the protests weren't addressed.
What were those root causes in your mind?
Well, I'd say it's a mixture of a lot of things, but I'd say to start off with, there is a certain population among the faculty that actively supports and even promotes the far left narrative. The dangerous far left narrative, I should say.
Which would be what?
Marxism, socialism, and that a narrative of the oppressor and victim. Whiteness is the enemy. Be an ally to underrepresented groups or oppressed groups, because if you're not, you're just as bad as the white oppressors. That sort of mindset is fostered and was fostered by certain faculty.
I'm fascinated. I'm trained as an economist and Marxist political economist, but I'm fascinated by psychology and sociology.
I believe that we all have values of social justice. I also believe that we don't all have the skills to deal with that. And in particular, when I think about white men, I think about that we are actually trained to not have those skills. So it's such a unique opportunity to come together and spend a couple days.
I see my role in teaching as two functions. One is developing critical thinking, but a lot of faculty say that. A second thing to me equally important is developing solidarity with other oppressed people, because critical thinking without solidarity and empathy can just lead to cynicism and so on.
Trump is going to lose the November election, but the misplaced anger of supporters is not going to go away. There's a danger of growing fascism from below. We need to build power from below. This shouldn't be taken lightly. I'm going to skip the Trump question. I hope other people deal with it, even though I think it's not that likely, but I think it's really important we do protect people with our bodies if necessary if they come in.
A new police chief was being put in, and I think she's not as bad as some of the ones, but she's still the police chief.
To start developing some of those skills that we're going to carry with us so we can live our lives consistent with our values of social justice.
I'm more optimistic than I have been at any time in my entire life. The 90s was really boring. The last Clinton administration, there wasn't much activism going on, and that really changed dramatically in 99 with the WTO protests right in this area in Seattle.
Protesters had been tear-gassed all morning. Finally, there was a lull in the activity when all of a sudden a group we had seen all morning, a group we now know as anarchists called the Black Bloc, began terrorizing the city. I was live on the phone as it started.
Trying to break the windows. They're slamming against the window. Oh my gosh, they just broke the Starbucks window. They're breaking into it right now.
And that kind of grew into Occupy, which in a sense grew into the Sanders campaign, which had a lot of success. We've had Black Lives Matter, which has sustained itself beyond any of these movements and really even beyond the civil rights movement. And I think we have to look at what's happening now as a backlash they're trying to become strong because our side is strong. And when we look at the rise of the right, it's because they're afraid. And they're afraid of something positive that is happening. We see these backlashes as, as kind of proof that these are powerful movements. So you should get involved at this time because this is a phenomenal time in history. We haven't seen anything like this in a long time.
And I think that's what contributed to part of the protests is that these young, malleable minds that are going to Evergreen, these are like 18, 19, 20-year-old kids who are being indoctrinated by certain faculty. But I never really understood the extent to which it had rooted itself in the administration.
Could you talk about how you discovered how far it went?
I would say that a lot of that boils down to my experiences with the protest itself, as well as, in retrospect, after meeting with George and not seeing action on our conversation and the whole sweeping of the protests under the rug and ignoring it and not addressing the root causes was a huge indicator for me. It was like, whoa, this is something that's ingrained in the administration and isn't going anywhere unless changes are made.
Last week, we talked with a guy who, after we talked with him, a bulletin went out at Evergreen State saying local conservative talk show host Dory Monson interviewed Joey Gibson, and they sent it out warning people to be situationally aware after this interview. And Joey Gibson is back on with me. I don't know why that is, but they sent out a bulletin after you came on my show last week, Joey.
Absolutely. You know, we're going to go up there, and they're afraid because we're challenging them with different beliefs.
Yeah, that's about it.
Patriot Prayer was widely accused across our distribution list of being alt-right, intolerant, white supremacist, right? It was accused on video in our Board of Trustees meeting by Zoltan.
There was a far-right rally that was not by libertarian conservatives, but I've been doing a lot of documentation. I've been working on this kind of research for 30 years, and these were Nazis from Portland.
That's a double accusation. They're not Nazis, and they're from Vancouver, Washington.
Oh, shit.
That movement has been the ones behind these systematic racist death threats and hate mail that have affected students, staff, and faculty of color, and others.
It just made no sense. The idea that these people, they were Trump supporters who spoke about being supportive of Trump in this rally.
Yeah, supporters of Pepe, too. You have to remember that.
There were supporters of Pepe, and there was a Kekistani flag.
There was a Kekistani flag.
However, it did not add up that these people were vehement racists of any kind, frankly. In fact, I saw people of different racial backgrounds. You could see that they were in the crowd. And then this article emerges, and it turns out Joey Gibson is half Japanese.
Yeah.
And his right-hand man is Samoan.
Yeah.
And he's not even particularly committed to Trump, right?
Yeah.
He's mildly committed to Trump because he doesn't have a better option.
Yeah.
And he is very committed to anti-violence and tolerance.
Mm-hmm.
So here's my point. You have faculty at Evergreen who are trying to portray me as the bringer of alt-right violence.
Yeah, you're the harbinger,
to Evergreen. Yeah. But when you look at that alt-right violence, it isn't alt-right. It isn't racist. In fact, it's more tolerant than our faculty currently are.
It's explicitly tolerant.
Now, this is the email that alerted the administration to the possibility that Joey Gibson and his Patriot Prayer were coming to campus, from Jamie Cooper, who was the Associate Vice President for Student and Academic Support Services. Gorge and Wendy. Many students and staff are currently huddled in the Unity Lounge, fearing that a white nationalist group is planning to campus next week. Rashida says Felix came out with this revelation at the Equity Council meeting today. I'm not exactly sure the specific info on when this will happen, but it seems to be coming from Dory Monson. I'm listening to the podcast right now to try to identify when this is supposed to occur. Students are requesting that the college close, and at minimum, we want to close student and academic support services. I appreciate any guidance on this and to be updated on this so I can keep students and staff updated. Students are also wanting to ensure that students who do not come to class next week due to feeling unsafe are not penalized, which they recognize as Ken's area. Jamie, he, him pronouns.
Leading up to Patriot Prayer coming up on campus, there's all these flyers and propaganda and people talking about there's this alt-right Nazi white supremacist group called Patriot Prayer that's going to come to campus, right? And that really had me scratching my head. I mean, I didn't know anything about the group, and I was like, well, that seems kind of bizarre that a white supremacist group would be coming to Evergreen, of all places.
Did you look into them?
I did. I looked into them and I found out that their leader, Joey Gibson, was, I believe he's Japanese Hawaiian. And that was the first indicator. I was like, whoa, why would a Japanese Hawaiian American be touting white supremacy? That's kind of a head scratcher if you think about it. So that was a first indicator for me. And then when I did some more looking into them, I found out that really the core of their message was acceptance and tolerance. And there's no other way to say this, but like really just like love.
Like hippy dippy love, or
not like hippy dippy love, but more of like the whole love thy enemy, don't hate, don't fight, hate with hate type mentality. I tried to engage with a few students leading up to the event on their thoughts on Patriot Prayer, and it really didn't go beyond the surface level. With the students that I spoke to, it was more of an acceptance of what had been put out there on these posters and these flyers of, well, there's this flyer that says that this group is alt-right and they're white supremacists, so it must be true. And there wasn't really any critical thinking or deeper thinking about the truth behind it. Before the event started, I decided to go and talk with Joey Gibson. When I met him, I was glad that he was willing to listen to an Evergreener's perspective. And I wasn't necessarily expecting that he wasn't going to be willing to, but the presence of all this propaganda, you know, it leaves like a little bit in the back of your mind. Well, what am I really walking into type thing? Even though there's indicators to say otherwise, there's still like this small reservation going into that. But I'm glad I did, because he really was there to show that intolerance of any kind, no matter where it comes from on the political spectrum, is wrong. And he actively spoke out against, you know, white supremacy and supremacy of all kinds.
I am here to stand against hate. That is the one thing that drives me crazy, and I talk about it all the time. But hatred, it always comes down to hatred. It always boils down to hatred. If we're going to stand against hate, though, we got to go in there, and we can't preach hate. We cannot be hateful. We have to be good people. We have to, everything that comes out of our mouth has to be with the motivation to preach love and to be good people. And hey, we have a student right here, and he wanted to make sure that I knew. He said, Joey, you got to understand that these kids don't represent the whole school. And he's right, I understand that, okay? They don't. And that's what we have to understand. These social justice warriors, they don't represent the public, they don't represent our country, and they sure as hell don't represent this campus.
And that's why he was there, to show that what was going on at Evergreen, this whole reversal of fortunes and desuppression of dialogue, was wrong. Really, while they were there to sort of stir the pot, there was honestly a sincere and earnest desire to engage in true dialogue, true conversation with the other side. And he even tried to converse with some of the protesters, and that was met with violence.
Why? How am I I need milk!
It's kind of funny because both sides were a bit disillusioned coming into it because of the role that the media plays. You know, some of the members of Patriot Prayer came in with the perspective, this is a school that's infested with socialist students, and the state shouldn't be funding a school that brainwashes students, or that sort of line of thinking that, you know, defund the school type thing. And I enjoyed the opportunity to say, look, this isn't the majority of students at Evergreen. It's just a vocal minority that gives the impression that they represent the whole school, but they don't. I circled around and tried to talk to some of the protesters and really ask, what are you opposing? Like, what do you think about this group? And all of what I heard didn't go beyond the surface. It was all just in line with what the propaganda was saying and telling them. These are alt-right trolls and white supremacists. There were several that told me that they had Kekistan flags and that is a symbol of white supremacy.
But you didn't see any thought beyond surface narrative, lots of energy around that surface narrative.
There was a lot of energy around that surface narrative. There was no desire to go deeper in thought. There was no desire to really think critically about reality, about the truth behind both sides of this issue. I actually saw Peter Bomer on the protesters' side. And I didn't know he was a professor at that time. I just thought he was an old dude that was with the protests, or that was with the protesters and showed up to support that side of the protest. So I had no idea that this was a faculty, and so I went up and I talked to him, and I asked why he was like on that side of the protest and like what his thoughts were, and really tried to probe deeper into what is the reasoning behind this protest. And I was kind of met with an interesting response in that he really questioned my questioning of why he was on that side of the protest. He wasn't wanting to engage in a dialogue. And in fact, how do I put this? He told me that because I wasn't supporting the protest and that I was questioning it, that I was wrong and that I was a detriment to the cause.
The cause.
I don't know if he said the cause, but that was the root of what his message.
What is the cause, though? I mean, screaming and yelling?
I don't know.
He's a faculty. Zoltan's a faculty. They all came out very strong with this narrative. They were the ones who took hold of the narrative of the alt-right Nazis are coming to campus. They're so frail. They don't even know what they're talking about, but they're so wrapped up in the narrative that if they do have an oppressor, they're finally vindicated. All the bullshit that they've spewed is finally vindicated. If Joey Gibson is a motherfucking Nazi, then they're exonerated. So it seems like they have to hold to that narrative, or else everything that they're standing for, it turns out to be exactly what it looks like. A bunch of people are really angry, don't really have forward thinking, can't handle an argument, so they shut everything down. It pisses me off more than anything that the protesters did, is the way that this certain faculty in the administration are playing out this weird sort of LARPing behavior and spending the reputation of everybody else because they're safe in their government job. It's the students who suffer, it's the college who suffer. They're completely safe and fine. And they can plug their ears and get a bunch of likes on Facebook when they go and whine about Brett Weinstein or whatever.
Yeah. I mean, that deeply upset me too. I mean, in retrospect, because mind you, like I said, I didn't know that this old guy that I was going to talk to was a faculty. So if I had known that when I went to talk to him, I probably would have persisted and really questioned what was being said to me. But I didn't. I didn't hold him to the expectations that I have of Evergreen faculty because I didn't know he was a faculty member. And I wish I had. In retrospect, I really wish I had. Because if I had, I mean, there's a part of me that really thinks that maybe I could have turned a light bulb on in his head, or at least got him to think beyond the surface level.
It's beautiful and heartbreaking that you're strategizing ways of educating a professor.
Yeah, there's a bit of irony in that. So after I talked to Peter, I continued to try to talk to the other protesters there. And I would say it was kind of split into two groups. You know, those who were at the fence were those with the masks, decked out in all black, the prototypical or the the Antifa image comes to mind with those who were up against the fence at the front lines, so to speak. And then behind them where I would say the older, middle-aged, holding the banners and stuff like that. So I really tried to engage with that segment, the back lines, and was met with a unwillingness to engage. It didn't go beyond the surface level, like I was talking about earlier. In retrospect, I think maybe some of that was because of the whole strategy of the protesters. And you mentioned the silly string earlier, right? How they threw one can at Joey Gibson. It's kind of, there's some irony to it because silly string in itself represents the whole silly behavior of these protesters. They sprayed silly string on me because they thought that I was alt-right and a white supremacist because I was asking questions. And what that serves as is a identifier, a mark to all the other protesters. Okay, this person's a bad person because they have silly string on them. They're a white supremacist. They're with the bad guys, right? So you're marked, and that immediately makes you someone who they do not talk to. And I think that might be part of why I wasn't really getting beyond the surface with some of these people that I was trying to talk to, is that they saw like the silly string that ooze on me and they're like, this is a bad person. This is someone who is an alt-right troll or whatever. Here's one of the eye-opening things about the protest for me. I was a bit surprised when I was trying to talk to those on the front lines, because I noticed someone who I'd previously had a class with was there, and I tried conversing with them and talking to them, and I mentioned their name. Someone who was with that person heard me say their name and immediately exploded on me, screaming at me, how could you say a masked person's name? You're putting them in danger. How dare you? Do you know what kind of threats that she'll get because you said her name, and that I'm a terrible person for calling someone by their name because they have a mask on? I was in a moment of shock. I was like, is this happening to me? And keep in mind, no more than like 5-10 feet away are these state patrol in riot gear, and they're watching this. They're just standing there watching this happen. And then it gets to a point to where this man who is screaming at me for calling someone out by their name while they have a mask on, it attracts the attention of all those surrounding me. And then everyone who is around me is against me.
For one small infraction that you didn't even know was an infraction.
Well, they don't even know what was going on. All they know is that there's this guy who is with them and is dressed like them and has a mask like them that is shouting at me who does not look like them. Wow. Therefore, I must be bad person. You know, it's very primitive thinking. It's groupthink. It's mob mentality. That was a moment where I was aware of the fact that the state patrol were not there to maintain the peace. They were there to make sure that people didn't die, because I was assaulted like right there and dragged out of there by the protesters.
The only act of violence happened from the protester side, or the pro-Evergreen side, or whatever that other side was. And there was one man who had a knife that the Patriot Prayer people took down and then handed him to the police, which completely demolishes the Boehmer Zoltan narrative of like, look at all these violent alt-right people, you know, and then they flush that narrative out there, inspiring all these violent far-left people who aren't the actual violent people to come pre-justified to be violent, pre-justified to be aggressive, pre-justified to assault you.
In retrospect, I shouldn't have been in that position in the first place. It was very naive of me. Once I was dragged out of there, I decided to just take a break from the protest for a moment, a short while, because I really needed to just unwind from that for a little bit. So I went over and visited with my friend for a while and explained what happened, and he wasn't surprised. He was like, you should have known what you were getting yourself into. I decided to go back. This is probably about like half hour later. And when I got back, I started to try to talk to a different segment of the protesters and truly engage with them. Because I figured, hey, this is, maybe I was doing it wrong. Maybe I was going about it the wrong way. Maybe I just need to come at this with a new approach. And I was met with the same response. Lo and behold, there was not a tolerance for those who asked questions. There is, in fact, a deep intolerance of that. And one of the most interesting things that happened from that is I asked a question of someone who literally told me that they wished that my children get cancer and die, and that my family should die, and then I should slit my throat, and all these terrible things. And then my response to that is, how does espousing hate accomplish what you are trying to achieve? And that, it's such a simple question, but the reaction that it evoked was similar to that of what happened with the person that I called by their name. And that was the people that were with that person immediately jumped to her defense and said that I shouldn't be questioning her intentions and that I was in the wrong, and in fact I shouldn't even be here, and that I was a disgrace as a student because I had mentioned that I was a student. And that was very surprising to me. So I responded by asking them, well, what makes your perspective better than anyone else's? And then that prompted them to do the exact same thing as the person who I called by their name. And they started ushering me, like physically dragging me towards the police barrier.
If you go up and question why somebody's there, why would they not want to tell you? Why would they not, especially the faculty, why would they not want to make their case? Is it because the case is it's already so apparent that they're on the side of right, that if you have to question that, you obviously haven't seen the light?
That's part of it, is that there's within the far left student body and faculty, there is a belief that their perspective is so apparently right and so correct that it should be apparent to everyone else. And that anyone who doesn't realize that is either trying to subvert their movement, damage their movement, and is actively against them, or B, is just completely ignorant and isn't worthy of their time or energy to explain why their perspective is right. It's a very high and mighty sort of perspective. I was very fortunate that in the wake of this, after I was let through, kind of went off, I guess we could call it the periphery, where there were some other faculty that were there that weren't really engaged in the process. They were just there to kind of monitor things and make sure that, shit didn't hit the fan, so to speak. And I talked with one of them, and he was one of my professors from freshman year. And I was very, very upset about what had just happened to me. And I was asking him, I said, why doesn't anyone want to talk? Why doesn't anyone want to speak about these issues? Why doesn't anyone want to engage about the very thing that they're protesting? And his response was very eye-opening for me. And it was that this isn't the time for dialogue because people are so emotional and so charged that they're not going to be in a mindset to engage in dialogue in the first place. That was very eye-opening for me because I hadn't thought about it like that going into it. I said, well, most people are probably pretty reasonable and would be willing to engage in a conversation with me. And then what happened to me was the example of the exact opposite of what I thought was going to happen going into it. That was a turning point for me at that day, and I decided that I wasn't even going to attempt to go back for round 3 after that.
And did that carry over into how you acted when school started back up again in fall of 2017?
About how I acted
with just engaging in dialogue, voicing dissent?
I still questioned things and voiced dissent within the classroom, but I didn't do it in the public way that I did in the spring of 2017. I can't remember if it was before the Patriot Prayer Rally or if it was after, but on one day I actually came out to Red Square and tried to invite dialogue with a few posters that I had. I don't remember exactly what was written on them. One of them was like, all perspectives are valuable, let's talk about it, or something along those lines, right? Something that was inviting or trying to be inviting. I was actually met with some people who actually did engage with me, and I had very good conversations with them. And we talked about what was going on at campus and what their thoughts were, and I was very happy about that some students actually wanted to engage and did engage me. But there was a negative response by a few individuals who I can safely say are part of the far left student population that saw the signs that I had as inflammatory. This is just my perception of what they thought based off of their reaction, but they saw what I was doing and what my posters were as an attack against their worldview. So they decided to just come and tear down my poster.
It's really disrespectful. I'm trying to have a peaceful dialogue.
Hey man, why'd you rip up that gentleman's signs? Why'd you do that? Whoa.
The fact that a student can't handle seeing a piece of paper with something written on it is troubling to me. It's a piece of paper with something written on it. You should be able to tolerate that and not freak out about it.
Oddly enough, there's precedent for that in the administration.
I serve as the chair of the Bias Incident Response Team, and this team is charged with responding to incidents that come to our attention who either are deemed bias-related or may have a negative impact on a community that we care about. In early October, it was reported to me that a number of hashtag White Lives Matter flyers had been found around campus. My heart sunk when it was reported to me. And after consulting with a small group of colleagues, I made the decision not to share this report with the Bias Incident Response Team. And part of my rationale at the time was leaning toward a strategy, which is sometimes the right strategy, to minimize and quote-unquote ignore the act in an effort to lessen its power and impact, versus, of course, the alternative, which is to elevate and draw attention and use the opportunity to engage with more speech and education to address the incident. Students in the GSU directly questioned me about this decision, and I assume others did so as well, although not directly to my face. And I'm grateful for the questions of the students. Why did I land there in this instance? What was harmful about that judgment call? Who was harmed in that judgment call? As I reflected, it has been important for me to recognize, and discouraging, for me to recognize that that judgment call was informed by my failure to step out of my personal worldview, largely informed by the fact that I'm white. And I thought I knew better. I'm disappointed and I'm embarrassed by that journey and that learning. And I'm especially concerned about it because I serve in a position that absolutely must do better if we're collectively going to better serve our students and colleagues of color.
Like, are you on our side?
I am on the side of the health and well-being of everyone's.
Oh, so you want equity?
I do want.
You want people to
Bullshit.
Yes. You want, okay, so
Liar.
what needs to happen? Stop. What needs to happen right now is we need you to go and talk to George. Can you do that.
Yeah, I'm willing to do that. My concern is that I'm going to be trapped in that room. Can you promise me that I'm not going to be trapped in that room?
I'm going to be trapped in that room. Promise you.
Why are you scared of
trapped in that room? But nobody here wants to physically hurt anybody else. We just want conversation to happen. So if conversation happens, if you guys walk out of there and you guys read the debates and you understand them, that's going to help a lot at this point. So I can walk if you want.
That's fine. I don't need to be escorted. I'm okay.
No, you definitely do need to be escorted.
All right, Wendy's coming down to the office now. Here we go.
POC are welcome here. Say it loud, say it clear. POC are welcome here. Say it loud, say it clear. POC are welcome here.
I understand what the protesters did was wrong, and how they acted was completely wrong, and it was terrible. And I'm not trying to excuse it. However, these are young kids who are trying to find their voice, and many of them are just trying to fight for a cause, any cause, to give them a sense of community and a purpose. But they did it in the wrong way. That doesn't mean we should excuse their actions, but really put it into perspective that Evergreen as a whole and these student protesters as a whole aren't necessarily bad people. They just did some really shitty things and acted in a shitty way. And that the response shouldn't be to push them away necessarily, but to try to show some understanding and teach them a better way to act as an adult.
Listen to people, try to respect what they're saying. Don't feel morally superior. I think it's death. You're never going to reach people you feel like you're better than them. Listen, find points of agreements, think why people believe in what they do, and then try to challenge it in a respectful way. And I think people do change.
Racism is bad for white people. Ultimately, in terms of really improving their lot in life. And I think the way to talk to white working class people is to find something that really concerns them, and how, in fact, unity with other racial groups could, in fact, help that along, and how not having unity can really hurt them. And I think that's one way to do it, as well as on the spiritual level of human beings, and to, you know, if they are religious, to talk to that part of the identity and how contradictory it is to racism.
Bishop. 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 Good girl. Bishop in the snow. The man with the tractor is saving us.